On the next episode of Al-Satlana, Our Middle East, an earthquake at the Dead Sea triggers a bigger earthquake across the Middle East region. Join us. Khaled Abu Toameh, my longtime friend and colleague. My goodness, we had a 4.2 seismic earthquake in the Dead Sea, but I think we had a 7.0 seismic earthquake across the whole region. Look what's happening between the Iranian regime trembling and perhaps shaking and perhaps on the way out for the first time since 1979, and across the Middle East in Gaza, an earthquake also potentially of 7.0, even though, right now it seems like things are stable for the moment, quiet for the moment. But it seems, Khaled, that in Gaza, and it's directly connected to what's happening across the region in Iran, it's the quiet before the storm.
Look, Dan, we are more than 3 months after the ceasefire went into effect. And let's look at the reality on the ground in Gaza. The reality is that more than 85% of the Palestinians in Gaza are still living under the jurisdiction of Hamas. In West Gaza, Gaza, we have
Right.
East Gaza and West.
The Upper West Side, as people in New York would call it, Upper West Gaza.
And that's number one. The Palestinian population under Hamas rule. Number two, Hamas has taken advantage of the ceasefire over the past few months to reassert its control over the area, to rearm and regroup. This is not an organization or a group that has any intention of laying down its weapons or stepping down from power, although in public they are saying that. Number three, we are now very close to the establishment of something called the Palestinian Technocratic government in accordance with the Trump plan. Now, if you look at this, at the names that have been floating around, potential candidates, members of this Technocratic committee, which is basically a government done, you see that some of them either belong to the Palestinian Authority or are affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, or have some kind of direct or indirect links to the Palestinian Authority, or Fatah, the ruling Fatah faction. So what are we talking about here? We are basically talking about an attempt to bring the Palestinian Authority back to Gaza through the back door. And I say, why not just say it openly? Why not say we are bringing the Palestinian Authority because we could not find someone else to come into Gaza? And but to call it a government of apolitical figures, and they're not affiliated. Excuse me, Hamas had to approve the names of the candidates. So if Hamas gives its blessing, that means Hamas knows who it's dealing with. And if the Palestinian Authority also has given its blessings, that means that these people are acceptable or affiliated in one way or another. Now, there's another important point, Dan. How can you have a government in Gaza when Hamas has security control over Gaza? Who's going to protect the government? Hamas, which means this technocratic government or committee will be at the mercy or under the mercy of Hamas. How will it function? How will it be able to enforce law and order, for example? How will it be able to, I don't know if that's its mandate, but how will it be able to go after terror groups if the security forces are Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad? So there are many questions that remain unclear regarding the second phase of the Trump plan. Let's wait. I mean, I expect earthquakes, by the way. These are political earthquakes that could really change the scenery in the Middle East, the whole arena.
Khaled, when you talk about earthquakes, it seems that from a American point of view, things are moving apace, but from a Middle Eastern point of view, which is exactly what our program is about, this pathway is leading to an eruption, seismic shift, tectonic shift, and an earthquake. And a lot of it is in the area of cognitive. There's a cognitive earthquake going on. What do I mean? When the Trump administration understood by the entire Middle East to be the strong horse today, announces just several days ago, number of days ago, that we are moving to the second stage. And even though in Mar-a-Lago at the summit, the recent summit between Prime Minister Netanyahu and President Trump, it was clear both men said, first step is the disarmament of Hamas. That language has now disappeared. And what is being reported directly now is what they call generally the demilitarization of Gaza, technocratic government, as you mentioned, and the reconstruction. It seems to me that all that is being messaged and conveyed in the same sentence. And that's a problem because Hamas is very smart. They're reading between the lines, and they understand, as you just pointed out, that they are still in control. They've changed their uniforms, they've changed their language, and it wouldn't be beyond them to lay down or to have a show, what they call in Hebrew, marit ayin, meaning just a Hollywood type of performance art, if you will, laying down a number of thousands of Kalashnikovs, just like they did when they released the hostages. They had a big ceremony. They had they made a big drama out of the whole thing. And then in order to please the Trump administration, they'll say, you see, Mr. President, we've laid down our arms, as Witkoff had demanded as part of the latest report. Now it's time to get to the reconstruction. Now that's the cherry on Hamas's cake, because they'll get the budgets for reconstruction. It'll end up in their hands anyway, because if they're in security control, it doesn't matter that you have the PA essentially coming back into Gaza. And the cooperation, we know there's been cooperation, even though they're frenemies, enemies and friends, from the beginning of the Oslo period. Hamas, Arafat, the PA, Fatah, they all cooperated, collaborated, and they also collided all at the same time. That is the Middle East that our friends in Washington must understand, that there is no inherent contradiction between Hamas and the PA cooperating, collaborating, and colliding and killing each other.
Well, history repeats itself. We've already seen that, these two groups, Fatah or the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, have been engaged in a civil war since 2007 when Hamas seized control of Gaza. Here's the point then. Hamas continues to exist not only as a security establishment or infrastructure or military group. Hamas also has a political presence and a civilian presence and an economic presence in Gaza. So what is going to happen right now? This is my scenario. You will have a Palestinian government, in charge of reconstruction, rebuilding houses, trying to, improve the economy and the living conditions of the people. And that exempts Hamas from its responsibility towards the people. So Hamas has enough time to regroup, rearm, and continue to operate in Gaza. This is exactly what's going to happen. And if this government dares to challenge Hamas, we will see exactly what, a repeat of what happened in June 2007. In June 2007, Hamas was less than 10,000 people. They woke up in the morning. They staged a coup against the Palestinian Authority and seized control of Gaza. So it will not be very hard for Hamas to topple this government, or even the Board of Peace. I mean, there's a lot of talk about the Board of Peace, and this Board of Peace will not have, will it have a physical presence in Gaza? Will its members be, physically present, or is this just something by remote control to run Gaza? There are too many questions, but at the end of the day, then it should have been conducted the following way. Before the implementation of, or before moving to phase 2, you should have issued an ultimatum to Hamas: hand over all your weapons, not just a few Kalashnikovs, disarm, dismantle yourself, cease to exist both as a political and military group. Then you move forward with a government, with the deployment of international forces and all these things. But as long as Hamas is standing on its feet, you haven't really achieved anything. This is an attempt, as I said, to bring back the Palestinian Authority, and to perpetuate the conflict. This is not a solution. I don't see it as a solution. I'm not very optimistic.
Well, I don't think there really is a solution in the context of jihad. I mean, we've talked about this on the program consistently, but this is the long Islamist war that the West is fighting a different war.
When I say solution, I'm not talking about peace and coexistence. Yeah. Hamas is not going to change. I'm talking about a solution to the presence of an armed terror group in an area very close to Israel, in an area where you have more than 1.5 or 8 million Palestinians. This is very problematic. And as you said, Hamas is there. This is about jihad. After we remove or destroy Hamas's military capabilities and we end its political presence, we need to remove Hamas also from the hearts and minds of Palestinians. And
how do you do that?
This can be done only through a thorough and deep process of de-radicalization. And this requires brave leaders. Only brave leaders can do that. Are there brave Palestinian leaders somewhere out there? Probably yes. Can they speak out? No. If you're living under Hamas in Gaza or under the Palestinian Authority, you would think 10 times before you criticize these two governments or before you speak out against them. So this is the pathway, the real pathway to, achieving stability at least. We're not talking about peace and security also. But, let's see. Let's see what happens with the technocratic government. There's a lot of talk about the possibility of a clash between this government and the Hamas government. Hamas will have a shadow government in Gaza. This is what's going to happen. Hamas is saying, look, I'm stepping down. But they've said it in the past, by the way. I'm stepping down. I don't want institutions. Okay, but where are you going?
So it's like Hezbollah in Lebanon. I mean, it's the same model. And I'm sure that Hezbollah and Hamas 100%. Are sitting around the table smoking, drinking, and discussing this new model.
This, Dan, is exactly what Hamas wants. A state within a state. They want to copy the Hezbollah model to Gaza. And unfortunately, or sadly, they seem to be succeeding in moving in that direction.
So this is why when you, Khaled, say de-radicalization, I infer that it requires defeat, complete defeat of Hamas. You've said this many times on our program. I also have made mention, and the people, the public consciousness must be influenced by the total and absolute defeat of Hamas, and the only force that is capable and willing to do it is Israel. And this is where Israel and America could, and our other allies could possibly clash, because this is sort of the elephant in the room is the fact that Israel is the only force that can and will do it, has done it, and would be prepared to do it. None of the Arab countries that were consulted,
or the Muslim countries,
or the Muslim countries. I mean, Indonesia offered, but only as a monitoring force, not as a. And Turkey did offer an armed presence, but that was an armed presence that would have supported and strengthened Hamas, not weakened and defeated Hamas. So here we are at this moment of potential de-radicalization, but that's not going to happen unless Israel is empowered in the next couple of months to defeat Hamas. Now that leads us eastward towards Iran, because it seems very logical that the American nominal agreement by President Trump to rescue the 90 million or so Iranian civilians, thousands of whom have been murdered in the last just over 2 weeks, would lead to, I think, a shift on the Gaza arena, in the Gaza theater, as it were, because if the head of the octopus is Tehran, and the tentacles of that octopus have been largely amputated by Israel, the head of the octopus was severely damaged by America and Israel. If the octopus is really, if its head is cut off, that will send a very strong message to the Hamas, and will make Israel's job and it will make this new structure in Gaza a little bit easier when Hamas sees the mobilization of massive power led by potentially the United States, where the Iranian people obviously have loosened the screws on the on the Iranian regime torture chamber of its own people. But it seems that there's really a direct connection between the defeat of the regime and the aftershocks, if you will, across the Middle East, which will also
only Hamas, Dan. It's also Hezbollah,
the Houthis,
and other Iranian proxies in the region. I agree with you. I mean, if you cut off the head of this octopus, and it will have a very good impact on the region. It will lead to the emergence of new leadership, more pragmatic people among the Palestinians, especially. Then you talked about defeat of Hamas. I go a step further, or two steps further. I say not only defeat, humiliation and destruction of Hamas. They must cease to exist as a political military power. They need to vanish from the Palestinian political arena. They have no right to exist. This is the only way to ensure the emergence of more pragmatic, moderate Palestinian leaders, the brave leaders I talked about, who will engage in a process of de-radicalization. But as long as Hamas is standing on its feet, I keep repeating this in every program. I'm sorry, if the viewers think
we're repeating ourselves,
but we have to keep.
We have to,
yes,
right?
Yes,
that's right.
We have to keep repeating, because this is the reality, and the fact that we're repeating it just shows that we are right, because nothing is happening, and we keep saying, folks, this is the pathway. This is the way to pave the way for the emergence of new leadership, of pragmatic leadership among the Palestinians. There will be no process of de-radicalization as long as the Palestinians are governed by terrorists and extremists and corrupt people. The Palestinians need new leadership, whether it's in Gaza, whether it's in the West Bank, leadership that will start preparing Palestinians for peace and coexistence, and not leadership that will radicalize Palestinians and drive them towards more disasters and death and destruction.
Here we have a very complicating factor, and it is clear that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, is being reported, and I've actually heard from people in Saudi that the Crown Prince is very hesitant regarding a possible U.S.-led strike on Iran. And it's a complicated moment, Khaled, because on the one hand, we know that the Saudis and the Iranian regime have been arch enemies since the establishment of the Islamic Republic of Iran in '79, and that Mohammed bin Salman and his foreign minister and the government, the ministers, have been very publicly critical of the Messianic Shiite regime in Iran as being, the carriers of poison and terror across the Middle East. But at the same time, the Crown Prince has a very strong vision called 2030 that has taken years of planning, and he stands at a moment of hopeful execution over the next 5-6 years. And he prefers that the regime negotiate some sort of far-reaching agreement with America, then have America completely decapitate the head of the Iranian octopus. Now, this really takes some thinking from a Middle Eastern point of view. Let's discuss that for a moment, because it all sounds kind of counterintuitive, right, in the context of what we talked about for the last almost 20 minutes.
Look, Dennis, possible that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the neighboring Gulf countries are afraid that if the U.S. attacks Iran, then Iran will attack them, in addition to Israel, by the way. So they're worried about, insecurity, instability in the region, and of being attacked by Iran. That's number one. Number two, it's also possible that these Arab leaders are afraid of the Arab and Muslim masses, of facing a backlash. Because if America attacks Iran, which is not very popular among many Arabs and Muslims, by the way, but their sympathies will go to Iran. And it will make the Arab leaders look bad. It will make the Arab leaders look as if they are in collusion with America.
The colonialists, the Zionists, once again.
Yeah, here our leaders are traitors. They are conspiring and all that. It's also possible then that, these statements coming out of Saudi Arabia, and by the way, they haven't been verified. I mean, these are media reports.
Right.
But assuming they are true, it's possible that Arab leaders are doing what Arab leaders have always been doing, lip service. You come out and you say, I'm against an attack on a Muslim country. I'm against an attack by America. This is aggression. And, because you need to make sure that you are on, you don't look as if you are on the side of the aggressor, as if you are part of this American Zionist conspiracy against an Islamic country. So they are walking a tightrope and they're being very careful. But at the same time, they're perhaps telling Americans and Israelis behind closed doors, why don't you finish the job? Why don't you get rid of this regime? We are very familiar with this behavior dynamics in the Arab world, where Arab leaders will tell you one thing in public and another thing behind closed doors. Yasser Arafat was a very good example of that. Other Palestinian leaders I've been talking to for many years, I mean, they have double messages, one for the West, one for their own people, and that's how it works. So people don't understand that these are the politics in the Middle East or in the Arab world. That's how it works.
In truth, if according to this line of logic, we could argue that the Crown Prince would be more than happy if America and perhaps Israel in the background did dismantle the regime, as long as it went okay.
Yeah.
Meaning there's no real principle here other than victory, right?
Yes. They want to ensure that, this is something that will lead to a regime change.
Yeah. And stability. I mean, at the end of the day, that's what the Crown Prince wants, stability for 2030.
Yeah. But let's see. I mean, it's all about regime change in Iran. If the U.S. and the West really stand with the people of Iran right now and don't repeat the mistake that Obama did back then when he turned his back on the anti-regime protesters, then we will, this could open the doors for for a new Middle East. As once said, the Iranian regime has always been very bad. Were it not for Iran, Hezbollah would not have been able to establish a state within a state inside Lebanon. Were it not for Iran, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad would not have been able to remain in power for 17 years in Gaza and launch all these rockets and all these missiles at Israel and finally carry out the October 7 massacre. Were it not for the support of Iran, you would not have had, all these Houthis and other militias in Iraq. So regime change is very important in Iran. It will have a positive impact. Peace is not going to erupt overnight, but it will send a message to moderate Arabs and Muslims that extremism and radicalism are not a solution. You need to distance yourself from these bad regimes.
These regimes, as it's been said, are really the bearers of occupation. The entire Middle East has been occupied by, in large part, radical Islamic regimes. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis in northern Yemen, the HTS in Syria, the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. These are all Islamic-based extremist and radical regimes. The same thing happened with the Morsi in Egypt, and and you go look what's happened in Algeria. So when people accuse Israel, the most indigenous member of the Middle Eastern family, of being an occupier, we really understand the depth of the indoctrination and the propaganda. Because if you go country by country, the indigenous members of the Middle East, the Zaidis in Iraq, and we didn't even mention Iraq, it's the Iranian occupation, Iranian regime occupation of Iraq through the parliament and its special forces there. You have Zaidis, and in Egypt you have Copts, Christian Copts, and you have Druze, and you have Kurds being attacked in Syria, and in Lebanon you have Maronite Christians being attacked, and you have moderate Shia being attacked. This is the radical Islamic occupation of the Middle East that it's been going on for decades, and I think we have to define the lexicon, the vocabulary, because that's the real mass regional occupation of the Middle East in service of this sort of dictatorial approach and the language conditioning that's gone on of blaming the smallest and only free democracy in the Middle East that is 3,600 years old is quite notable.
This has been the trend in the Middle East since the Islamic Revolution in Iran in the late 70s. And we've seen, after that, we've seen the emergence of new groups among the Palestinians. We've seen Hezbollah. So it goes back to Iran. And you're right. Radical Islam is a big problem. Islam has been hijacked by a dominant minority of thugs and terrorists and murderers who are committing all these atrocities in the names of the majority of the Muslims and even the Arabs. And that's why what we want to see is a coalition that brings America, moderate Arab states, moderate Muslims to fight again against these radical Islamists. This is the only way. They need to be defeated. They must not continue to exist. I mean, and I think a big mistake the Americans are making, or the Europeans or whoever, is negotiating with Hamas about the future of Gaza. I mean, why are you negotiating with Hamas about post-war arrangements? You are legitimizing Hamas. You are turning Hamas into an actor. I was reading just last night that, a Hamas delegation headed by Khaled al-Hayya has arrived in Cairo, and they are meeting with officials, Egyptian officials and Palestinians. What's going on?
We're back in Oslo.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, would you consider negotiating with ISIS and Al-Qaeda about, the future of the Middle East? I think this is a big mistake, and it's legitimizing Hamas and presenting them as a acceptable, legitimate partner in the Palestinian arena, when in reality they have no right to exist. Hamas's slogan is, Israel has no right to exist, and the counter slogan should be, Hamas has no right to exist, period.
Yes, that's right. And therein lies what we're doing at the Jerusalem Center for Security and Foreign Affairs, in which you play such a central role in our jihad alert, because what we're underlying all this conversation and the major structural problems in the Middle East is jihad. And for people to legitimize and mainstream and platform Hamas as an ongoing political actor, negotiating with them is, again, defying the whole idea or neglecting the whole idea of jihad. That's because you're right. Would anyone in Europe consider negotiating with the Al-Qaeda 7/7 bombers? Would anyone do the same with the Madrid 2004 Al-Qaeda massacre? Al-Qaeda? Would anyone consider negotiating with Osama bin Laden in the 9/11 Al-Qaeda mass murder in the United States? Would anyone consider negotiating with ISIS? And they would all say no, no, and no. But then they say semicolon, but comma. The Gaza issue is different. It's a political problem. I heard it myself from the former French ambassador.
Well, in which case, I refer you to the 1988 Charter of Hamas. And if you look at it, at the beginning, it quotes Hassan al-Banna, the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood, the Egyptian guy who founded the Muslim Brotherhood in the 1920s. It says,
Israel, 28.
Yeah, Israel will continue to exist until Islam obliterates it.
That's right.
Period. So
it's very consequential that you brought up Hassan al-Banna, and then his, in a way, his successor, Said Qutb, who was actually killed. I think it was killed by the Egyptian authorities for threatening Egypt, as a matter of fact. But that leads us to one of the drafters, if not the main drafter, of the Hamas 1988 charter, and that was Abdallah Azzam, who was a cleric from Jenin and a Palestinian who was the mentor to Osama bin Laden. Yeah. There you have the completion of the jihad story.
Yeah. And It's very easy. I mean, you don't have to be an expert on the Middle East. You don't have to be an Arabist, what we call. You don't have to be an Orientalist. All you have to do is just, know the language, read Arabic, and you will see that these people are very honest, very clear, and very consistent about their messages and their ideology. They don't hide it then.
They don't hide it, but what they're suggesting is that we put on our seatbelt because the earthquake, as we said just a little while ago, is just beginning to shake the Middle East to its foundations.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, Khaled Toameh,
Thank you.
That's our time for today. I think we'll continue along these lines. There's a lot more to talk about here in the Middle East earthquake. But we thank you and we thank our viewers for joining us for another episode of Al-Sharq Al-Awsat Lana, Our Middle East. Stay with us as we continue to ride down the road with lots of bumps, hills and valleys, with our seatbelts fastened. Thanks so much, Khaled.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.